All right, so today we're talking about tricep training. If you're a bro that wants bigger arms, this is a muscle that's very important, if not the most important muscle in your physique. So when it comes to triceps, this is a muscle group that I've struggled with for years. And within the past 6 months to 12 months, I've made some significant changes to my tricep training. And there's certain variables and certain changes I've made that have benefited me greatly. So if there's any muscle that's changed the most from when I started lifting, even for the majority of my lifting career until now, it's the triceps. My philosophy in training them is entirely different than it was even just 3, 4, 5 years ago. There's a few different things that have led to these changes. The first thing that I've got for you guys is I actually started to pay more attention to tension curves. And this is something that gets overlooked. So when it comes to tension curves, the way that you want to think of this in a simple way is which part of the range of motion places the most tension on that target muscle. So with triceps, it's easy for us to be a minimalist and say, all right, well, a close grip bench press trains your triceps. And it's not incorrect to say that. But when you look at where the most tension is placed on your triceps in that movement, it's on the lockout. And when you're in the lockout of a close grip bench, your arm's almost all the way extended. It's not a whole ton of range of motion for your triceps. It's the same way with, say, a tricep kickback, even an isolation lift that targets only your triceps. It's only difficult on the lockout of that too. Even though you go through a full range of motion all the way down here, there's not a whole ton going on until you get right up to about here. And I know a lot of us at this point don't do a whole ton of tricep kickbacks, but those two lifts are great examples to understand how tension curves work. So understanding these tension curves, it did two things. One, let me choose which lifts have the best tension curve in my opinion, which is something that places the most tension in the lengthened position of that movement. And it also let me refine my technique and my setup for the lifts that I was already doing. So for something like a push down, which I'd been doing forever, but had been doing it suboptimally, quote unquote, I found ways to optimize it and actually get a lot more out of this movement. So I'll put a clip up here and you can see my range of motion and my stability is greatly increased. And I'm actually in a position where there's maximal tension in that 90-degree angle. So it's not something like a JM press, which I'll touch on later, where the tension's highest at the fully lengthened position, but it's much more than what I used to do, where I'd stand a little bit farther back from the cable. And again, it would mimic that tension curve of a push down not a push down, of a kickback, where it's easy for the start and then the lockouts, it's skewed to make the lockout tougher, which we're slowly learning more about this. It's that it's not quite as beneficial for growth as it is training that muscle in that more lengthened position. So that's a key for me. Number 2 on this list is my overall mindset with tricep training. It is, as ridiculous as this sounds, it's something that I've preached on the channel for this entire existence. Nothing's an accessory lift. A bench press is for my chest what a push down is for my triceps. There's no hierarchy within my programs. Of course, there's a sequence and an order and a structure in each session, but no lift is more important than another unless a muscle is a higher priority and another muscle is a lower priority. There's no hierarchy. This isn't powerlifting. This is bodybuilding. Each lift is dedicated to a muscle that you're trying to grow. If a lift isn't serving a purpose, if a lift is an accessory in your program, you might be wasting time doing that lift. You should treat your tricep pushdowns the same way you treat your hack squats or your barbell squats. And it's paying attention into the finite details of these lifts that actually allows you to make progress. I think natural hypertrophy does a really good job of describing that spider mode physique. There's a reason why that's so prevalent, especially in natural lifters. There's a reason everybody says they're torso dominant. It's because when they're bench pressing, they look into every nitty-gritty detail. Like people talk about their leg drive on bench press before they talk about the tension curve of their tricep pushdown. Like, do you see what I'm getting at here? People go all in, they write the entire essay and pay attention to every single detail of squats, bench, deadlifts, to every little nitpicky detail of it. But then a tricep pushdown, oh, it's just an accessory, go through it at the end. It doesn't matter how you do it. Use your attachment, whatever one you want to do, just do 3 sets of 10. There's a reason why some lifts might make gains, and there's a reason why some lifts don't make gains. And your mindset with how you see your lifts and the arbitrary hierarchy that you put onto them, it's probably holding you back. And I know for sure that is what held me back. So don't overlook mindset when it comes to lifting. Number 3 is range of motion. And this is exposing my weaknesses. I was naturally extremely weak in the lengthened position. So what did I do? I avoided that position of my tricep lifts. Even if you look back at my training when I first started this channel about 14 months ago, even on my overhead extensions and my tricep training then, I wouldn't go past 90 degrees. And why is that? It's because I was super weak in that position and I almost felt helpless. So for the longest time, I said, well, there's no point in training that range of motion because I'm weak, I'll have to use less weight, and that's going to be less stimulative. But what I was missing at that entire time is that I need to train that range of motion. 1, because I'm weak in it, and 2, because that's the range of motion that actually builds the most muscle. So I was missing 2 big things with that. And the funny thing is, now that I've been doing it, I'm pretty much strong throughout the entire range of motion on every tricep lift. So it's not like you're just always going to make this sacrifice of using a ton less weight because you're weak in a certain range of motion. No, you'll build muscle and you'll get better at that range of motion. So target your weaknesses, and that's ultimately what bodybuilding is. So that leads me into my next point, proximity to failure. And another one to extend off of this is actually filming my tricep lifts to make sure I have a good proximity to failure. A lot of isolation lifts, which is generally how triceps are trained for the most part, they start to hurt and they start to feel a little bit more difficult than they are. When you look at your film of, say, a push down or a JM press, you'll quickly realize that you have more reps in the tank than you think you do. And there's certain lifts that you should be taking past failure as well in certain situations. And this is going to vary from lifter to lifter, so I can't give you blanket advice for this. But know where you are, know your program. Is this a lift that you should be taking beyond failure, to failure, to 1 rep in reserve? You have to experiment with these things. But one thing that I've realized is that when I started filming a lot of my isolation lifts, and this is something I've kind of done for a while, and more so more recently, but it's something I have done for a while, you start to realize you're leaving more reps in the tank than you think. A lift feels much harder in the set than it looks when you watch it back. And this goes from a compound lift to an isolation lift. It doesn't really matter. A lift feels more difficult than it looks. You have more reps in the tank than you think. To prove that, film yourself. I think this can apply to probably 95% of people, especially the lifters that haven't filmed themselves yet. You should be taking advantage of it. We all have iPhones. You can instantly take a video. You can get a $10 tripod. It's well worth it. The next point that I've got here is actually the split that I use. And this is something that gets talked about like it doesn't matter. I disagree. I think splits do matter. I think your organization is important. And I'm not going to lie, I'm a pretty big fan of an upper-lower split. And ironically, this is something that the younger me would have laughed at. But part of the reason why I have bigger triceps now is because I moved to an upper-lower split. So the way that I see an upper-lower is, the way that I used to see it was you train so many different muscles that you don't quite get a full attention to every muscle. You don't quite get to do what you need to for each muscle group. But there's a couple different ways around this, and there's a couple reasons why this isn't an issue in the first place. One, it's because when you have the work capacity to get through an entire session without losing intensity, what happens here is now each muscle that you train, you're training in a fresh state. So when you look at something like a push-pull legs program, by the time I got to my tricep training, after 4 horizontal and vertical presses and isolation for my shoulders and for my chest, by the time I got to my tricep work, my triceps were fatigued but not stimulated. So my intensity was much lower. I was mentally checked out of the gym. And it was easy for me to tell myself, oh, my triceps are already hit. They're already stimulated because I did my pressing. At the same time, this might not be true. And in my case, it wasn't true. My arms always lagged, and it's because of this programming. So that's something I've learned, is that an upper-lower split, it does work. It also allows for higher frequency too. So if you ever do need to train upper body, aka triceps, 3 times a week, it's pretty manageable. My next point here, JM press. This is an epic lift for the triceps. This is something that maximizes range of motion and keeps tension in the target muscle for the entire range of motion. This is the beauty of having a compound lift that actually biases the triceps. This is the inverse of a bench press. You take a flat barbell bench press. What you're doing here is you're biasing your chest. Of course, it's a chest lift. You're working your pecs the most. Your shoulders help out a little. Your triceps help out a little. Depending on your setup, your genetics, and your leverages, you'll have different proportions of how much of each muscle actually contributes to the lift. You invert this with a JM press. You press with your triceps, and your shoulders and your chest will help get the weight up. But especially when you're doing this lift in a Smith machine, it's a full-on compound lift for the triceps that goes through an extreme range of motion. And I'm not telling everybody to go through that extreme range of motion like I do in my videos and my training logs, but maybe try to ease into that. You are going to have to build up your elbow strength first before you go into those heavy weights and heavy range of motions that I have worked up to. It's not something I started off immediately, but doing this lift, I have to give it credit. And there's a lot of other lifts that I've optimized and changed and swapped out and done in my program, but the JM press, I think this is the number one lift that has built my triceps over the past 8, 9, 10 months at this point that I've been doing it for. And bonus points if you do it in the Smith machine. It's still a great lift with a barbell, but in the Smith, it's a good lift. It really is solid. And it matches the tension curves and the range of motion of the programming that I've been talking about in this video. This lift fits under all those, it fits under that entire umbrella. And then the last thing that's helped me the most, as counterintuitive as it sounds, I've actually reduced overall volume for my tricep training. My frequency is bumped up a little bit to 3 times a week. I've been doing that consistently for a long time at this point, but reducing my volume per session, it's helped quite a bit because it lets me focus more on what's in front of me. I'm training harder than I was before, especially for my triceps. I was certainly not training this way during my power building phase, but reducing volume, but letting it be higher quality volume and using that 3 times a week split on my upper lower to actually build momentum within my training. It's helped a ton. I'm adding reps consistently. I'm adding weight every now and then. Again, these are tricep lifts. They're a little bit lighter, so load increases are a larger percentage of the overall picture. It's not like you're adding 5 pounds to a deadlift. Adding 5 pounds to an 80-pound pushdown is a different story. So adding reps every now and then, occasionally adding weight, and just maximizing my technique, focusing on the tension curves and the range of motion and the proximity to failure. This stuff has allowed me to build momentum and really get into a good groove with my tricep training. So even though volume's lower, I'm not as sold on volume being the most important thing. I think it's intensity, it's effort. There's a huge list of things that all matter that I'm not going to go over in this video because I have a bunch of times on the channel. But it's all of these things combined that I talked about that have chipped into actually helping me apply this to get bigger triceps. So with that being said, that's all I got for today. I'll see you guys in the next one.